It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I know the anxiety that comes from watching a loved one struggle with a nonlinear path. This podcast was created to fight back against the narrow picture of success painted by social media. Each week, we share authentic stories from people who changed course, failed, and ultimately found their own definition of success. These are the stories you need to hear to prove that changing your mind is common, and you don't have to have it all figured out at 18. If you're a parent or a young adult looking for a little proof, you're home. Now, let's get into today's episode. But if you'd like to explore how I can help your young adult, schedule a free consultation through my website link in the show notes. Today, my guest is Samantha Meyer. Samantha grew up with her parents, grandmother, and aunts and uncles working in the treatment industry. Despite all the knowledge and resources they had, her family could not help her with her drug and alcohol abuse. She got sober through AA at 25 and has been working in treatment ever since. The really exciting fact is that she is finishing her clinical degree this spring. I'm really happy for her. Now, let's jump into the interview. We're not going to wait any longer. Here's Samantha. Samantha, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited. So, I know you. I've gotten to know you a little bit over the years. I definitely know your parents, but I want this interview to be, I'm just excited to hear your story because I don't feel like I've heard it. So why don't you start by even just fill in the listeners, where did you grow up and what was the messaging that you were getting about what you're supposed to do after high school?
Perfect. So I grew up here in Utah, which is where I am now. I grew up in Park City. And as you know, my parents have been, in this world for a very long time. So while I was growing up, my mom was working as a therapist and raising us, and my dad was running a therapeutic boarding school treatment center for teenagers. So when I was growing up, I kind of knew exactly what not to do. I had a lot of cautionary tales. And what that kind of did for me when I started to struggle was it really showed me exactly how to avoid getting caught and sent to a place like a therapeutic boarding school or program, right? And I think when I was growing up, it was very much, ingrained in me that the only option after high school is you got to go to college right away. If you take time between, it's, you're going to flounder. You're not going to be able to get your degree. And, when I went to college, I was totally unprepared for that level of independence.
Okay. So right out of the gate. So where did you end up going to school? And like you just said, you kind of alluded to it. I was not prepared for the independence. So paint the picture. What kind of unfolded?
Yeah. So I think that, I started, I'm in recovery and have been for a long time. And I started, abusing drugs and alcohol when I was pretty young, 13 or 14. And I kept it really kind of under wraps. I was doing anything I could to keep it under wraps, right? I was photoshopping my report cards. And then I went to school at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I had a lot of family in Boulder, so it was a really natural fit. And I liked, all their programs and what they had to offer. But once I didn't have, kind of any checks or supervision, I could kind of be totally free reign with what I was doing. And, I got into a lot of trouble.
I'm just picturing this, Samantha, just raising hell in the streets of Boulder.
Yeah, that's literally exactly what it was. I was a total wild child. I was oh my gosh, I have the freedom, at the time, what I thought was the freedom to be myself for the first time, right? Because I felt like I was always keeping this big part of myself locked away, and it wasn't really that.
All right. So what ended up happening? Because you're you started this conversation by saying, hey, I grew up in Utah, which is where I am now. So we could already start to put those pieces together where clearly at some point Boulder was not it. So where did you end up going after that?
Yeah, so I kind of had a long journey when I was in Boulder. At a certain point, it became pretty obvious that I was not finding success academically or socially. And I went to treatment when I was 20 or 21. I went to a wilderness program in Costa Rica that was super helpful and amazing. I loved my therapist there. And I ended up, actually, when I was done with the program, I ended up living in this little town in Costa Rica for a couple months and just doing yoga every day and taking care of myself. And it was so amazing. And then, during that time I had taken leave of school. And so once I was done in Costa Rica, I went back to Colorado and finished up my undergrad degree. And then during that time, I went on vacation down to Mexico, and I ended up moving down to Mexico. I met my former partner and moved down there 2 weeks later and was like, great, now I'm really not under any supervision, I fled the country so that, I could kind of get away with whatever I wanted. And I lived in Mexico for almost 5 years.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. That's a long time.
It was. Yep.
Okay, so at what point, because clearly there had to have been either you hitting rock bottom or some sort of conversation about, hey, Samantha, you aren't able to hide, even though you're in another country, clearly something's playing out. Was that an internal dialogue or decision or turning point, or was that something that ended up being kind of a family conversation, or what ended up how did you end up leaving Mexico?
Yeah, so great question. So I was down there for a long time, and I think when I went to treatment, my drug and alcohol use certainly came up, but I think that for women especially, it's kind of hard to suss that out, right? What's going on here? Is this mental health stuff? I was, so depressed and so anxious and struggling with so many things. And my use certainly wasn't helping that. And I think over the years, my use became the presenting concern, right? And so I felt like I got so many tools in treatment, and I felt like it really planted the seed as well for me to understand that I certainly had kind of a messed up relationship with drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. And during my time in Mexico, my use and my drinking, escalated and escalated. And at a certain point, my friend and I had opened up a little beach bar down there. And on the night that we were opening it, there was a propane leak that ended up with a big explosion and fire. And a lot of people got really hurt, and it was really traumatizing. And right after that happened, I spiraled in a really big way, started doing a lot of illicit prescription pills, drinking on them, really dangerous stuff. And the day before COVID hit in Mexico, the day before the entire country shut down, in this tiny town in Mexico that you've been to, I know, there was at the time one English speaking AA meeting per week. It was on Thursdays at 9 a.m. And for whatever reason, I woke up at 8:30 one Thursday morning and was like, I got to get my shit together. I was so it's kind of funny. I was so weird and paranoid at the time. And I remember seeing the map of all the COVID cases kind of overtaking the world. Yeah. I was like, I better get my act together right now because this is going to be really bad. So I was it was really divine timing, honestly, because I think that if I had continued to, drink and use through COVID, I probably would have died. And I got into AA, it was this one English speaking meeting a week. They started offering more specifically for me. There's a lot of, immigrants from America and Canada down there that had, hundreds of years of sobriety. I think I was the youngest person there by 20 or 30 years at least. And they really wrapped around me and supported me as I started the journey. And I think I'd been living such a non-traditional life. I really needed that level of traditionality. I needed some big book thumpers to kind of kick my ass. Mm-hmm. And that was it for me. It was, March 17th of 2020.
Wow.
Yeah. And, about 6 months after that, my relationship had fallen apart and I moved home to Utah, to my parents. I was 25. I moved home to my parents' house, lived in their attic, worked at the ski resort. It was the best job ever. I skied to work and, read my book all day basically. And then I started working in treatment. There was a treatment center opening up in Park City and I got a job there as a guide and kind of, continued to build a career in that.
Well, I know that's not where you are today. So fill us in on what you're doing, not just for the job, but I think there's also an important element of like what else you have like irons in the fire right now.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I started as a guide at this treatment center. I loved it. I then moved into helping them like build their outdoor program, which was so cool. And then I'm a people person, and I started working at another program in their like marketing and admissions side. And that's kind of where my, current career started. And now I am the admissions director at Balance House, which is a program here in Utah that is amazing. And I'm also in my final semester of getting my master's of clinical mental health counseling. So I'm doing my internship here at Balance House, taking clients, and so ready and excited to graduate.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we've heard your journey, and I think it's important because we're kind of like, there are several parallel paths, right? It's the academic, it's the social emotional, it's also the substance user recovery specific path. And so now everything's kind of come to a head. Do you see yourself as successful?
Yes, I do. I'm really proud of where I am. I'm really proud of it because this, where I am at in my career and, academically and just personally, it's really the first time in my life I can say like it's really due to my own hard work. And that feels amazing, right? And I think that the reason I feel successful is I'm no longer, based on all my experiences, I'm not uncomfortable with uncertainty. Like I am totally fine to see how things play out and, work hard to get what I want and like recognize that that's not always what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I imagine that's also a helpful mantra to have too, as a clinician, as you're meeting a client, on the other side of the room, as you're kind of going through that therapeutic process.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about this. Obviously, you named it. We'll make sure that it's in the show notes. Let's do a quick little side plug for Balance House. What the heck is Balance House and who do they serve? And then I've got a follow-up question.
Okay, perfect. So Balance House is a dual diagnosis treatment center for young men, like 18 to 30. We're here in Salt Lake. It is an extremely clinically sophisticated and robust program. Like I feel genuinely lucky, even if I didn't already work here. And obviously I'm a little biased. Like the clinical work and experience I'm getting here is pretty unparalleled, which is amazing. And we also have an extremely robust outdoor component. So like all of our guys are skiing at least twice a week, camping, climbing, hiking, kind of you name it. So it hits all the bases. And I think that, I've worked at a lot of amazing programs and there's, so many great programs out there, but I do love working for a program of clients that I can really relate to. Like, even though I'm a woman and we only work with young men, like I can just understand, the externalized behaviors that we see. And, and I understand how challenging it is to deal with, addiction, defining your identity, and mental health issues all at the same time. Like this is a tall order for anybody. And it feels really good to be part of a place that kind of helps smooth that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So for anybody that's listening, we'll make sure that we have links and contact information for Samantha, but links for Balance House so you can learn more in case you're not familiar with it, because it is a fantastic program for young men, especially those that like to be adventurous. So follow-up question. Now that I have to ask this question and I'm going to say it. And then I'm also going to say, if you like immediately follow it with Joanna, I don't want to answer that for this interview, we'll cut it out. Okay. So now that you're getting ready to get your master's as a clinical mental health practitioner, right? A clinician, what's the vision? What's your like plan? Because I also just think that there's got to be some overlying the 5 years spent in Mexico, although it really sounds like in hindsight, it was messy. There's still a cultural component to that just like, it's one of those things that like, I forget the quote where it's like, once you stretch, right, you can't go back to your old formed self. And so I imagine that there was also growth through the pain and the messiness from that cultural experience, but it's also probably influencing your approach or your philosophy as a human on earth, especially leaning into a clinical role. So bigger question, what's on the horizon for Samantha?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll answer that in two parts, right? Like I'll start with kind of like, my biggest takeaway from my time in Mexico and the culture there is just like how unbelievably important and impactful your small community is, right? Like people down there, it's very different. It's more collectivist, and you take care of each other, and that has ripple effects that goes out. And that was, like such an incredible piece of living down there, and something I really try to carry on forward. And that's, another thing that I feel good about working in this industry, right? Is it's pretty much the same thing. Like we're all part of a really small community, and, trying to positively impact each other and hoping that the clients we work with go on to do the same thing.
Yeah.
I think in terms of my plan, when I graduate with my degree, I am going to continue in my role as director of admissions at Balance House. And that's a big part of the reason, why I'm getting the degree as well, is like Balance House, we're, really clinically rigorous and robust. And we also treat really complex mental health. And so it's important, I think, to have a clinical perspective from the first phone call. I think that'll be really beneficial. And, like forward in my life at some point, maybe I'll get sick of taking calls at midnight someday. And then I'll like always have this option to fall, I don't want to say to fall back on, but just, to pivot to, right? Like this is something that gives me a level of security that I've never really had before, is having a higher degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, follow-up question, and this might be kind of leading into the last part of this interview process, is that you have grown up literally from like being a child who has family members connected to treatment. And you also named that you opted to go to your own treatment experience as a young adult. And so I think that, and Balance House serves young adults. So here's the theme, right? We're like, we're getting there. For somebody that opted to go to treatment, I think sometimes and you probably experience this too with Balance House, that sometimes there is this like fear, or there's a concern, really, like what really are the expectations? Are you actually going to provide the experience that you describe? Is there going to be any type of behavioral component to this, or some part that is not in my control, which is so important sometimes for young adults when they come in and they're like, I want autonomy. I want my phone, or I want, whatever, you name it, right? There are things that are important, and they're just kind of like a part of what make us okay in the moment. And so I say all this again with all of these lenses from which you were raised, where you work, and kind of like your own experience. Is there any bit of advice that you would give to a young adult, no matter the gender, right now, that would be questioning whether or not considering a treatment program would be worth their time?
Yeah. Oof, that is a really good question. And I'm thinking about, what kind of led me into it. And, I was working with this really amazing woman outside of Colorado. And I remember, I was so concerned about, freedom. Like, what do you mean I'm not going to have my phone? What do you mean I'm not going to like be able to talk to people? What do you mean it's in another country? Right. I was like, all these things. And like, my freedom was, my biggest concern. And I remember what she said to me, and I literally say this all the time when I'm on the phone with potential clients, is like, how free do you feel right now? And I think that that's like really the important message to take across, is it's like, hey, this may be like a short-term sacrifice in the freedoms that you're used to. And like, don't you want to see the opportunities that this could present for you? Right. Like, aren't you tired? Right. I was exhausted. I was like, I couldn't keep swimming against the current of my own life like that. And I think that that's kind of a common thread with the clients that we see too, is they're really, really tired. And whether they're being leveraged into treatment or choosing to go voluntarily, like they're afraid of what the next step is. And that's how I felt too. Like, despite, all the chaos that my use and, actions created, it was still predictable, like I knew exactly what I was going to get by acting a certain way, by using things, by drinking. Like it was predictable, and it was safe for me. And, making the decision to go to treatment was really scary. And so I think like just holding space for that is also super important. Is like, like this, you may not know what the future brings with this. And like, what we can promise you is that you're going to have a life-changing experience. And I did.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks for going off script, because that was definitely like me just thinking in the moment, like you've probably got some like pretty profound insights around this, especially because of your own experience and because of the role that you're in. So let me ask this, and this will be kind of our closing question. Obviously, you've infused a lot of kind of advice or tips throughout sharing parts of your own story, right? Like people can hear what you've shared and absorb that kind of and use it however they may, whether it's a parent or a young adult themselves. Is there anything else that you feel like would be important to mention right now during this conversation, like a piece of advice or a piece of wisdom, something that you want a parent of a young adult to know or a young adult themselves?
Yeah. I think that, and this is a really, my experience is really individual because, my parents were in this world for a long time, and now they're consultants themselves, right? Like they're colleagues of yours. And so I think like something I share with families and young adults a lot is like my family and my parents are perhaps some of the best equipped people out there to help me on my journey and like figure out where I should go and what I should do. And when I was really struggling, there's nothing they could do, like it had to be, I had to be ready for it. And it had to be my decision. Right. And I certainly had like some leverage going into treatment and got so much out of it. And my relationship with my parents was, really strained for a long time. And now it's amazing. So I think that honestly, and, probably kind of cliche, but my biggest piece of advice is just trust the process throughout this, right? Like, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but there will be a change and an impact in the family system and in the individuals within it throughout this journey.
Samantha, thank you for taking time out of your very busy day, right? Full-time finishing grad school while working a full-time job, like doing all the things. So I know that time is valuable. I just want to honor it. Your story is very meaningful and I appreciate you sharing it. And I know that there are folks that are going to listen to this and say, wow, I really needed to hear that, whether it's a parent of a young adult or a young adult themselves. And so just thank you again. And then my call to action for anybody that's listening to this is to reach out, right? Whether it's just to connect with Samantha or whether it's just to learn about Balance House or both, you know how to reach out. Contact is in the show notes. Samantha, thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me, Joanna.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guest for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email Joanna at lilleyconsulting.com. Be sure to check out the lilleyconsulting.com website for additional resources outside of podcasting. Now, if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Thanks again for listening in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.